Hello and welcome back to part two of the greatest British sports person of all time podcast extravaganza that we have been doing here on the Winging It F1 podcast, which is now just the Winging It Assorted Sports podcast as coined by Adam Dickinson last episode. I'm Freddie Coates. I'm joined here with Adam Dickinson, Nigel Dew and special guest Henry Clark to go through some great British sports people. Last episode, we spoke at length about why Lewis Hamilton deserves the title, and we also threw Sir Steve Redgrave and Sir Andy Murray into the fray. So we're going to go straight into it now. We're going to talk about the Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, who is an 11-time Paralympic gold medalist. She got her first medal in the Paralympics. It was a bronze at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, and she got her last one at 2004 in Athens. And sports, like we're saying about having different standings and stuff like that. And we had a conversation, Adam and I, at least prior to this podcast, about the standing of Paralympic sports and the fact that that's more necessarily down to the success of disabled sports structure in the United Kingdom. But Tanni Grey-Thompson is basically the figurehead of all of that, of the push for disabled sports, of the push for Paralympic success globally, I would say, not just in the United Kingdom, to the point where she's still active today with everything she's doing. She's a life peer, crossbench life peer for a reason with everything she's doing. And I'd argue that she is one of the people who definitely goes under the radar as one of the greatest sports people of British history, in the way that she has taken the bull by the horns of wheelchair sprints basically, and has just nailed it and has won it. And then on top of that has become an inspiration. It's an overused word, but she is one of the top people who has always spoken about consistently for my entire life as one of the people who changed the face of a sport and changed the face of every sport that comes under a Paralympic disabled sport bracket. That I think she's a name we can throw into the mix for one of the greatest British sports people of all time. And I think all that it really depends is on something I don't know much about, but is the competition she would have faced, and is that a detriment to what we're saying here?
I think that is the detriment, but I think you're right in saying that she's a massive inspiration, because we see now Britain at the Paralympics, they win literally hundreds of medals, and in the 90s, 80s, I'm not sure when the Paralympics started, but Britain definitely didn't win that amount of medals, and I think Tanni Grey-Thompson has been a massive figurehead for Paralympic sport, not just wheelchair racing. So I think that is a great point there, Freddie. But for me, I think Sarah's story deserves a mention, because she is also a Paralympian. She did swimming and cycling, track cycling and road cycling. So she's done two different sports, because obviously track and road you can do both, just like Bradley Wiggins. But to win Olympic medals and gold medals with swimming, and then go on to be incredibly successful in cycling at her age as well. I'm not sure how old she is, but she's been doing it for a very long time. I think she's 43 at the moment, and so in Rio she would have been 39, and she's still breaking world records. She's still the benchmark in cycling. She's even she even took part in able-bodied races as well. She was that good. I think she has to be in the mix for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I definitely agree with all that. But I think, particularly for, women's sports obviously come to the forefront more in recent times. People do know a little bit more about Dame Sarah's story. But with Tanni Grey-Thompson, I think, if she'd have competed in an era like today, where there's much more media attention and focus around, because she, not only was she competing in Paralympic sport, which obviously doesn't get the coverage, she was competing as a woman in an age that she competed in the 90s, so it wasn't that long ago. But you still think of the considerable changes that have happened in women's sport in the last decade. Then there is, if she'd have been competing in this era, I think she would get a lot more recognition than she gets. And there's a valid point about Sarah Story changing sports, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, just that's like unbelievable. Like, that is like Andy Murray winning Wimbledon and then getting out and winning Silverstone. But you know, but then Tanni Gray-Thompson also, you know, she competed across such different distances. Like, she dominated across all distances, and you know, it's obviously Paralympic sport works a little bit differently, but there's a different side to it. But you know, you don't see, like, Mo Farah was dominated middle distance, but Tanni Gray-Thompson dominated middle distance, like the shorter distance stuff as well. Like, phenomenal achievement, and again, she definitely, in my eyes, is the most underrated greatest British sports person of all time.
Sarah Story competed in long and short distance as well, winning on the road, you know, over 2 hours, and then winning a 4-minute time trial on the track. So I don't know. I think they're both, for me, they're both on like a similar level, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
I think I'd agree. I think the competition, you know, in Paralympic sport, in terms of just the countries who are able to put together a successful Paralympic program, is a lot smaller than you get in other sports, and I think that's kind of what counts against it, really. And also, you know, I know in particularly track, athletics, Paralympic athletics, then there's not many heats. You know, I think there might be a semi-final and a final. I think that's what counts against it, kind of both of those being in the conversation for the greatest. But I think I'd put them both top 10, and maybe Tanni Gray-Thompson top 5, I think, you know, and as Freddie said, her achievements beyond the track as well in improving, you know, the standing of disabled people, and, you know, being able to then go into the House of Lords and inspire so many people.
Yeah, and I actually think, and I also think there's also a relation back to the point I made about Murray with the, you know, there was no precedent of great with great Paralympian women before her, and you know, they're not saying that Sarah Story's achievement should be lessened because of that, but I just think a trailblazer like Tanni Gray-Thompson, I think she, you know, 16 Paralympic medals and 30 world records, and she won the London Marathon 6 times. Like, I think in an age where, you know, Paralympic sport went under the radar massively, I think that is an incredible achievement, and the longevity behind that. You know, I wouldn't know the ins and outs of it, but I can't imagine there was much, if any, you know, monetary funding behind her in those days for Paralympic sport. So I think for me, that probably what pips Tanni Gray-Thompson to Sarah Story.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, you know, they're both wonderful, great British talents that, you know, especially, you know, in terms of women's sport as well, they're fantastic role models.
Yeah, I think Tanni Gray-Thompson definitely dragged women's Paralympics and arguably a lot of women's sports just to the forefront of the turn of the century, and just basically is a pioneer in changing the mindset of all of that in the United Kingdom for the past 20 years, I'd say. And I think there's a lot to put on Tanni Gray-Thompson's back for a lot of that. And like you say, to come from a trailblazer in a sport that's going to be at the bottom of the rung on funding, in a sport that's going to be not watched by anybody, not cared about, frankly, in the 80s and 90s, to then use that as the platform to turn it around is something else. And I've got an enormous amount of respect for that entire story that's still going on now to this day. So we're running out of a bit of time with this podcast. It's been going on for quite a long time. There's obviously a lot of debate to be had. So we're going to be rounding it up with some just a minute style kind of brief monologues to throw a few more names into the ring, more honourable mentions than necessarily top spot contenders. But I'm going to hand over to Mr. Adam Dickinson to talk you through some more immense sports people.
Yeah, I actually think these I think all of the ones, or most of the ones I'm going to mention, could actually be contenders for the top spot. But yeah, I think first one is Mo Farah. In a bit like we talked about with other sports, he's put a British presence on a sport that was dominated by other countries. It kind of, there wasn't anything there as the Ethiopians and Kenyans, is it Haile Selassie, who was just out there, absolutely cleaning up. And he has come through and become that. And he works incredibly hard, obviously, to be a long distance runner, 5,000, 10,000 meters. And it's not like 100 meters or 200 meters. There's tactics involved. He nearly tripped, I think, in one of his world championship and in London 2012, maybe one qualifying heats, and nearly tripped over, and that would have been it. So he was one of the poster boys of London 2012. I just think his achievements in, as we talked about with other people, but bringing British presence to a sport that previously had no representation at the sharp end. I think he's up there, maybe top 5, maybe not. I feel like I probably got about 8 people in my top 5, but I do genuinely think he is one of the greats, and he's a true gent as well.
And what I would say with Mo Farah, sorry, I know we're only meant to be doing 1 minute, but I've got to say it. So he won back-to-back. He won 2 golds at London, then 2 golds in Rio. But I think his performances at the World Championships, when he won 2 gold medals in 2013, 2 gold medals in 2015, and then he won a gold each in 2011 and 2017, I think. But to win, to defend his title, every 2 years over in a sport where you have to peak on the day, you've got to be at your best, and other runners, can beat you, and it comes down to fine margins. I think that is quite extraordinary, really.
But you couldn't win I'm a celebrity, so
no. That's
but neither could Vernon Kay, so that says a lot.
We missed that out in our criterions, but but I think he probably won't be up there just because, I don't know, I guess some people have done more, and maybe he is a bit underappreciated, but I think he's properly up there, and he's one of the greatest sports people.
There we go. So that's Mo Farah added to the list. Let's go around the round table to Nigel Chu with one of his. Is it out there suggestion or is it not an out there suggestion? You can never tell with Nigel. Your turn. Who you throwing into the ring this time?
I'm going to throw into the ring Ronnie O'Sullivan, who I believe is the most underrated British sportsman. I think mainly because snooker is nowhere near as big as it used to be. But Ronnie has been at the top since 1992 when he came onto the scene. He's the youngest ever ranking tournament winner, and he's got the record for something which I think will never be broken, which you can't really say for many sports, which is to do a 147, which is a maximum break or maximum score in snooker in 5 minutes and 8 seconds, which is just absolutely ridiculous. You can find it somewhere on YouTube, but the speed he goes to do that was incredible. And that, when we talk about moments, is one of the greatest sporting moments ever. And I don't think that will ever be beaten to do a 147 that quickly. He became a 6-time world champion last year in August, after he hadn't won it for quite a while, actually, for about 7 years. But he came back and he won it. He's done over 1,000 career centuries. He's the only player to have ever done that. He's won, I think, 18 or 19 Triple Crown events, which is like tennis's 4 Grand Slams, except in snooker they've got 3. He's got the most of them. He's got every record apart from Stephen Henry's 7 world titles. Ronnie has only got 6. And to be at the top for that long, to be favourite for every single tournament, there's a snooker tournament every week or every 2 weeks. I think he's seriously underrated, and he's one of my personal favourite sports people.
Is it a sport?
Yes, it is.
It's a league competition. We've had this conversation before.
Yeah, I think that's maybe for me what, the athletic element. I don't know if there's so much. Maybe that's just
skill,
me
being
bigoted.
And just like tennis, it's a level playing field. It's just a cue, a table, and balls. It's never really changed.
that you have to run in tennis.
Well, you don't run in F1, do you?
If you fall over
No.
when you're playing snooker, you might not be able to do it.
What is the perception of snooker to like non-snooker fans? Is it a really small sport?
Well, I've only got into snooker in the past year or so, but once I've started watching it, I kind of got a bit hooked by it. I kind of found it because I think everyone's played pool in the pub. Everyone's, knocked a ball into a cue and realized, wow, I'm really bad at this, and that's what everyone thinks. I know that for a fact, and whenever I've watched it, I've kind of been in awe at the skill, and also tense at the competition. To be fair. And I can't remember who it was Ronnie was playing in the semi-final in August, but it was
Mark Selby.
Selby. That was a really good game, and that was just they were both seemingly on a level above anything, and the fact that it wasn't the final was a tragedy, travesty. That's the word. That's why we take so long to do this podcast. I can't think of words. And I think. Yeah, I understand why it's not a sport, because it's like it can be compared to a board game, but it's also as Nigel says, it's elite competition, it's intense skill, and it's near perfect accuracy all the time, which is something that you need in every sport. So why not? Let's say
it's not one of the hardest at all, but mentally it is incredibly draining, because if you're not at the table, all you can do is sit there and watch your opponent. You can't do anything. It's not like tennis where you can play a good shot back, or in football where you can do something with the style of play. You just have to sit there and watch. And Ronnie has been at the top for so long. I do think it's an incredible feat that he's done.
Yeah, before this becomes the I don't know, what's a snooker phrase? the Pot the Black podcast. We should move on. Mr. Henry Clark, your turn to fly the flag for somebody.
Bit of a left field one, and probably again won't be considered the greatest, but I think one again that's worth a mention was Nick Faldo. Now, a bit of an odd choice, and probably a victim of not being such a household name, but he performed exceptionally in golf in probably one of the toughest eras of the sport. Like he was in an era of Ballesteros, Greg Norman, Bernard Langer. There were. Again, it was a little bit like Murray in a way. He won 6 majors, so a lot, but not the most sort of. He's not on Tiger Woods numbers, sort of standard. But there wasn't really anyone that dominated an era, a British golfer, that dominated an era in the way that he did. And again, it was a strong era of the sport. So he was ranked number 1 for over, I think it was nearly 2 years. He was number 1, which is an unbelievable achievement. Like with the way golf rankings work, they seem to change every shot almost. So I think he's probably not one that would be the greatest, but he probably is Britain's greatest golfer. And where you then put him on that, where you put him on the list of greatest sports person is up for debate. But I think he's definitely worth an honourable mention.
Yeah. I don't know anything about golf, so I can't really.
I know the Ryder Cup.
Even make an argument for once.
I mean, taking a strand from that, like you say about you said household name. I think of all the names that were mentioned there, to me, Nick Faldo, apart from Tiger Woods, is the one I know. He's kind of heard the most. And from a complete outsider, of someone who only really knows what crazy golf is, like I kind of look at Nick Faldo and think, yeah, it's a name I know for a reason, and that's kind of all I can add to that. But yeah, like you say, you gave a really good argument that obviously about the period in a way that we can't rebuttal, but
I think Tiger Woods takes he's that big. Tiger Woods, the rest of everyone else before and after him kind of gets overlooked. And I think Nick Faldo is definitely one of those golfers. Yeah, I think that made sense.
Yeah,
he's one of those golfers.
Winning Augusta back to back is, I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head how many people have done that, but I can be pretty certain it's not many at all. That's a serious achievement, and fifth. I think he's got the fifth most all-time wins on the European Tour. It's again a different era of golf, different. The calendar looked different, but I think he's definitely one. He's regarded very highly in the world of golf, in the Golf Hall of Fame. So I think he's definitely someone that should be considered.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, good point, well made.
Yeah. I think we're going to do one final loop around of names. I'm going to dip the toe in the water with one of the last ones, which will be Sir Ben Ainslie, who is a world champion, America's Cup champion, Olympic champion sailor. And I mean, it comes to the question of where do we rank sailing? And no one knows where we rank sailing because it depends on the wind. But below. Yeah. And Ben Ainslie's record is it definitely transcends the sport, and the fact that no one knows anything about sailing. People know what the American Cup is and that it happens, and that sometimes they have aerodynamics involved in it, and that's about my knowledge of sailing. But I know who Ben Ainslie is, and I know he's a brilliant sailor, and I know he's fantastic at what he does, to the point that he got a knighthood for services to sailing. That means that he's clearly respected in his field, and he's statistically excellent. He's one of 3 athletes to win medals in 5 different Olympic games in sailing. He's only the 3rd person to win 5 Olympic medals in that sport. And when it comes to that level, he is only just behind Steve Redgrave and the cyclists who we're going to mention shortly in terms of statistics when it comes to British Olympic medal success. So he's definitely a name that needs to be thrown into the hat. And whether it will be pulled out is a different question, but he is certainly a extreme talent in what he does, and the fact that we're mentioning him just shows that. I have nothing else to say because I know little about sailing.
You've done a really good job there, to be fair, Freddie. Better than any of us could have done.
Yes.
What is sailing?
I think it is a tricky one, of course. It's the same, people say just, sits on the boat and lets the wind take him where he wants to go. But, they're quite, to be that dominant for that long, there quite clearly is, why, if it was that easy, Britain would have more champion sailors that were challenging him at the top, and we don't. And you could potentially make the argument that Britain have the reason why I would maybe not quite have him up there is because he might be considered an all-time great, but the nature of sailing means that certain countries would find it very difficult to produce sailors because if you're a landlocked country, where do you do your sailing training? It's not like Ben Ainslie pops down to Weymouth or wherever and jumps on his boat. Where some countries just don't have that, but that shouldn't detract from his achievements. He's clearly a very successful, and it's clearly we just don't really know that much about sailing as a minority sport to really put it up there.
One fun fact about landlocked countries in water is that Bolivia have a day of the sea where they remember the time when they used to have a coastline, and they have a parade of their navy, but they're a landlocked country. But anyway, it's just one of those weird things that has happened for 100 years.
I was about to say that Bolivia has a navy fact, but I think that again, I don't know much about sailing, but the fact that Ben Ainslie can be a sailor and considered in this conversation, I think, is what kind of
that's a really great point.
His standing, that a sport that a lot of not necessarily looked down on, but just don't know much about, and yet he is in the conversation. I think for me, again, he wouldn't kind of be in my kind of top 3 or so. But he has just dominated that sport and definitely deserves a mention. Is it wiggling back round to me?
It is wiggling back round to you. It is your turn to throw lots of names into the velodrome.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Wow.
When Henry said he was pinning his colours to the mast for Andy Murray, I thought that was a transition that could have been used for Ben Ainsley, but
it was, but it wasn't.
Yes.
Damn.
There's a few. Chris Froome, Bradley Wiggins, Chris Hoy, Jason Kenny are the ones that kind of seem to be the top echelon. I think Chris Froome winning 4 Tours de France, and a Vuelta a España and a Giro d'Italia. He's won all of the cycling Grand Tours, which not many riders do. I don't have a list off the top of my head who have done that, but
he held all 3 as well at the same time.
Yeah, he won the Giro and he won the Tour, then the Vuelta, then the Giro, and they are the toughest events. I think the Tour de France is the toughest sporting event around, or kind of mainstream sporting event around, in terms of it is just so physically demanding. You're riding like 3,000 kilometers, up over mountains. It's and you've also got to be thinking on your feet. You've got to be tactical while you're doing that. And for him to come through and do that is, it's incredible. He's not had the biggest competition. I think the generation of cyclists coming through now will probably eclipse the level of competition that he faced when he was riding. But to do that, to kind of go into the top echelon cyclists who have won 4 or 5 Tour de France and the other events that we've mentioned, I think puts him right up there. Again, probably top 5 in what he's done and bring British dominance to it. It started with Wiggins, but then he was the one who really hammered that home. And if he hadn't been there, I think it's very likely Team Sky would have gone for a non-British rider, and that would have been lost, and they would have pushed through that. So I really think he deserves to be up there.
So is he, out of all the cyclists, is he the one you put as number 1 out of the 4 you've just mentioned, would you say?
I think I'll put him higher than Wiggins, and then I think it's quite hard to compare to the track. But I think I'll put him right up there in kind of my mental list.
I mean, it's interesting because we were talking about before we came on, Jason Kenny is actually the joint most successful Olympian, which many people don't know. They think it's Redgrave or Wiggins or whatever. But and plus Jason Kenny is still, fingers crossed, hopefully going to go to Tokyo if it does happen this year, so we could add to that tally. And track cycling, it is a difficult one because I don't think the competition is quite the same. But Kenny and Rio, we did 3 different events: the team sprint, the individual sprint, and the keirin. And to win 3 gold medals, to get 3 out of 3 essentially is, a massive achievement. Chris Hoy did the same in Beijing, so you could argue, okay, maybe it's not that big of an achievement if someone else has done it 8 years before. But I do think Britain has been very lucky with the influx of cyclists that it's had in the last 10, 15 years. And again, I think Jason Kenny is one of those underrated sports people who many people don't really talk about, even though he is the joint most successful British Olympian.
I think Jason Kenny can certainly make a claim to be part of the most successful British sports people couple with he's married to Laura Trott, or Laura Kenny now, and obviously she's got a pretty outstanding Olympic record in her own right. So I think those two probably together have probably got. I can't think of many British sporting couples that have got more success between them than them two. So I think he's certainly at least winning 1 title in my eyes.
Yeah, their kids are going to be insane. They're going to be doing a whole Olympics. Just make them Team GB.
Yeah, I know 2 of the Rio 2016 female hockey gold medalists were married, but outside of that, I can't think of any. But I think there's an argument of how much. I think Hoy was more of a trailblazer in terms of turning, British success from the doldrums of the 90s to the vast success that they've had now. And then Kenny's kind of taken that and continued that quality through.
Yeah. Not even going to mention Wiggins. Amazing, really. Wins a Tour de France and then wins gold medals at successive Olympics. Not even going to mention.
That was his honourable mention just there.
Yeah, it's really difficult because he was the first British winner of the Tour de France, which in 99 years there'd not really been anyone close to it, and he came through. I think that is an incredible achievement, and obviously his Olympics. I think it's I guess the problem is so on. I think just the problem is the people who've come after him have kind of cast shadows on that, which is it's harsh, but they are all up there as some of the greatest sports people that this island's produced.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're going to go around to Nigel now for someone who you probably would be surprised if you know anything about the sport we haven't mentioned already. Nigel, over to you for a nice quick rundown. We are running out of a lot of time very quickly.
I've chosen a Winter Olympian. I've gone from Lizzie Arnold, who does the skeleton. I don't know.
Skeleton.
I'm talking about it. I don't even know the name of the sport. She won in Sochi and Pyeongchang 2014, 2018, defended her title. And the Winter Olympics is something Britain aren't particularly strong at. So I think for a Brit to defend an Olympic title is a massive achievement. And skeleton, from what I've seen anyway, is quite a diverse sport in terms of the countries that participate. There's lots and lots of different variations of where the best skeleton people come from. So, I think she deserves a mention.
It's a terrifying sport. It
is
flinging yourself down. I don't know what speeds they go, but it's pretty high speed, leading with your head.
And then to do it to a point where you're having to concentrate to do it to get the incremental gains that you'll need to get to win a gold medal is another it's another level of insanity. But I mean, it's one she does very well.
I think it reminds me of kind of cricketers before there were helmets, kind of putting their heads on the line, against some of the fast bowling attacks. It's that kind of just risk that you go through and that becomes normalized. That becomes normalized. Yeah, I just think for me it's an incredible thing to watch.
I think I'm just going to throw in a quick name in a sentence or two before we move on to a close with Henry, and I'm just going to mention Catherine Granger, who is I think the most successful female Olympian in British sport. I think that's true, and she was obviously winning medals all the way up until I think Rio, and sort of rode the wave that was created by the rowing boom from the end of Redgrave, Cracknell, and everyone who we've mentioned previously, and took that to a level in women's rowing, and obviously is a fantastic Olympian in her own right. I think she obviously deserves a mention as well. But I'm going to throw it over to Mr. Henry Clark to round off with I think a very admirable suggestion.
Are we going to go with Bobby Charlton?
Do what you want, mate.
Say whatever you want, literally.
Okay, no. Well, actually, sitting here thinking, I was actually thinking, Bobby Charlton, he World Cup winner with England, regarded, Sir Matt Busby described him as near perfection as a player. He's very, probably England's greatest talent they've produced. But actually, sitting here thinking, I think I've thought of one name that I have overlooked, and I'm quite ashamed of myself that I've overlooked it. And actually, what about Jimmy Anderson, the highest ever, most wickets ever for a fast bowler, over 600 Test wickets. The other week he's is he 39, and the other week he took six for whatever, nothing against Sri Lanka. His success, he will go down as probably the greatest fast bowler of all time when he finishes, and I think it's probably a victim that he's currently still going. So we kind of disregard him, and because you know when we talk about the greatest, we're often looking backwards, but I think his achievements are also definitely worth a mention. And I think once he retires and his numbers are sort of cemented and don't have the asterisks of he's still playing against them, I think he very much will be considered right up there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people we've mentioned who will be benchmarks in a couple of years' time. And I think Anderson is definitely already one of them, in the same way that we've mentioned with Hamilton and a lot of the cyclists as well. They're already they're still active, but they're already the pinnacle and what's being looked at for the future. So I think he's a definite contender. Actually, now you mention it, surprised he wasn't spoken about sooner. Are we going to? We've got about a minute to maybe have closing arguments on who we all want to put forward. I think you might have been able to guess on a few of us through the podcast, but we've got all our criteria have been decided. Anyone want to throw a name in the hat for a definite number one, or are you all just going to just sit there and say, it's too hard? Because that's what I'm going to do.
No, I do. I think Henry made a really good argument for Murray, and kind of his effect outside of the sport. While I don't think it's as great as Hamilton's, is something that I hadn't really thought about. You know, in terms of who he's inspired, but I still think Hamilton's quality in such a high-profile sport, in the intense competition that there is, in the way he has dominated and he has become a new benchmark of greatness in the sport, alongside all of his work outside of it and the way that he has become F1. He has become kind of the flag bearer for F1. I just don't think that anyone else has kind of been so great and well-rounded from Britain.
Yeah, that's where I was leaning towards as well. Nigel and Henry, do you have any? Henry obviously made a very impassioned argument for Andy Murray. You're standing by that, I presume?
Yeah, I think. I think I have to now. But to be fair, though, the only other name that I got that can completely trump everyone, undoubtedly, is Maxwell Woosnam from the late 1800s. Sorry. Gold and silver in tennis at the 1920 Olympics, a doubles title at Wimbledon, a 147 break in snooker, scored a century at Lords, captained Britain in Davis Cup, captained Manchester City when they finished runners-up in the Football League Championship in 1920, captained England, and he also beat Charlie Chaplin playing table tennis, and he was using a butter knife rather than a bat. So if Lewis Hamilton, Andy Murray, Ben Ainsley, or whoever Lizzie Arnold want to do that, I look forward to seeing it.
Thanks, Henry. That's going to be my answer. So I don't have to do what Freddie did.
Yeah, that seems a fantastic place to round it up, actually. So thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to listen to our ramblings about the upper echelons of British sport. You can find all of us on Twitter. Our Twitter's going to be on the screen. I'm probably running out of time to mention them, but that's fine. You can listen to this on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, whatever you want, at Winging It F1 on Twitter to find everything that you need about this podcast and to find links to all of our work. And we're going to put a little bit of a detail on Henry up there as well, so all of your new fans, Henry, will be able to find you. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.